250 YCS starts next week, and let's do my first tier list. I'm not going to sugarcoat the worst decks or the tier 2 decks. I'm going to be real with my thoughts and how I think the format will play out. I'm going to tell you what I think the decks you should take to the YCS to give you the best results. And if you want to go and have fun, then have fun. Ultimately, I want to go over what I believe will do well next week. My name's Jake Quinsee. I topped the most recent World Championships. I've got 5th place overall. I've got a ton of YCS tops, and I don't think this will be my first, well, I don't think this will be my last tier list. Guys, sit back, enjoy, and let's get straight into my first ever tier list, building up to the YCS 250. Okay, so first up, we obviously have Kashtira. Now, Kashtira is an interesting deck. This deck, it's quite weak in some ways because it has some points in the deck where it's quite a fragile engine. It can be interrupted. But in terms of interruption, the opponent gets some sort of compromise for what they're trying to do. So let's say you activate Unicorn and you decide to Ash Blossom. They get a look at your extra deck, find out what you're playing, and then banish a card that will be decent to banish, because now it will restrict what you're trying to achieve with your extra deck and your archetype of the deck that you picked. So I like a Kashtira. I like what it achieves. It has kind of an interesting way to play it. You have two ways. You can go with the control or Rise Heart play, which is kind of like the Zodiac type of style, where you're just sitting on a monster. It plays around Nibiru because it's only 4 summons, and you can control the game with a Rise Heart, which is literally a Macrocosmos as well. So nothing's going to get sent to the graveyard. It's all going to get banished, whilst it's attaching a bunch of materials. Now, what's going to be interesting is for the next week, a lot of players have started to adapt to playing Kaijus. If you play Kaijus in your deck list, you're going to be very favorable against the Kashtira matchup. Now, what will be interesting is how the format will evolve. If everyone starts to play Kaijus, it's going to lead into players wanting to go all out and combo out because they're not worried about Nibiru. So with Kashtira, I do think this deck is a solid tier 1. The engine itself is solid. What it achieves is great. You can adjust what you're trying to do with the deck. But the fact that you can sit on a Rise Heart, control, and pass, this deck will be solid. So I do think if you have access to this deck, you should take it. It's arguably one of the best few top 2 decks I would take. The other deck, comparison to that, where I feel like you would achieve quite a high success rate, it would be around Spright or Labyrinth. Now, we'll go straight into branded before we go into these, but if you do decide to play Kashtira, just be aware that players are playing Kaijus now and more frequently than before, which means your Rise Heart is weaker than before. Okay, so like previously where everyone was zone locking, okay, and then just getting destroyed by Nibiru, players then adapted to a Rise Heart with Kaijus, and now it's going to go back again where it's going to be go all out. And also a note to take as well, because a lot of players will be playing Kaijus, if you play some sort of combo deck, you're going to do quite well because there's less Nibirus in the format. There's less Lava Golems and Sphere Modes in the format, which means now you can have a full combo or a full combo deck, which will do quite well next week. So I do think a combo deck is probably an interesting one to take. Okay, so next up we have Branded. Branded, in my opinion, isn't the best deck. It's doesn't really end on a great going first board. I do find this deck is probably one of the best decks to go second with, especially with the implication of Dragoon. Now, if you're a good player with Branded, you will achieve a lot more than a weaker player because you'll know how to play around Effect Veiler, Infinite Impermanence, Ghost Mourner. Ghost Mourner is quite popular now, especially in Kashtira. So obviously playing Fusion Deployment to get Cartesia to play around those free cards is useful. I do like Branded, but the one thing that I really don't like about the deck is the fact that when it goes second post side, it's much weaker. Obviously going in game 1, going second, it's very strong because it could just go Dragoon, inflict a bunch of damage, attack for game. The other thing with the deck is it does have a lot of recursion in some ways, but I'm just not a huge fan of it. When everyone's playing Barrier, it's just not going to do very well post side, so you really need to win game 1. So I'm going to, compared to what the format should be for the YCS next week, I'm going to probably put it I can't put it as a tier 1.5 really. It has to be a tier 1. But then again, if you're wanting to look at results for the 250th, I am going to put it for the tier 1.5. Now, the reason why I'm putting it there is I want to give you what I believe will do well next week. I want to give you the best information I possibly can provide you with the most value. If you take branded, you will have some solid rounds, but you are going to struggle. And that's something that you might not want to do next week. If you fully understand branded and what it tries to accomplish, then you probably should take the deck. But if you're solid in as a player, knowing other decks as well, the same level of branded, then I would switch for sure. Next we have Labyrinth. I think Labyrinth is definitely a strong deck for any format where the format is quite diverse. We're in a format where there's so many decks now that are able to compete. It's not where Tearlaments was just crushing every deck, and it was kind of like a triangle format where it was just Floowandereeze, Spright, and Kashtira, Tearlaments. But Tearlaments always won in the end. That was the deck to take to the event to win. You've got to remember, when you're deciding to what deck to take, you've got to think about what you want to achieve there. And if you decide to take like Spright or Floowandereeze in the previous format when Tearlaments was everywhere, you don't really have a shot at winning because that deck is got the highest ceiling. This time around, though, it's quite different because the format's more open. We probably are going to see 3 different winners at the YCS next weekend. The 250 is going to be big. There's going to be a lot of players at each one, and that is going to give you a lot of different decks in the field as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the outcome turns out. So with Labyrinth, the cool thing about Labyrinth is the traps that it plays. The traps that it plays hit a lot of decks, which means those are going to disrupt a lot of decks in the current game. The format is kind of slowed down as well, which means we get more turns per game than we would before on average, which means traps now gain more value. So if traps gain more value and a deck like Labyrinth can abuse traps, set them from the deck, and then bounce any card that's a problem, and you've got a non-targeting boss monster, I think Labyrinth's one of the best choices to take to the YCS this weekend. So I'm going to put Labyrinth for a tier 1. Very good deck. Very good deck. Okay, next up is Spright. Now we have 2 Spright variants here. We have Spright and we have Runic Sprite. Spright won the most recent South American YCS. It's actually a finals. They both made the finals. One made evenly, the other one didn't. But interestingly, both did play the adventure package. Now the adventure package is very strong overall, especially in a diverse format. With the format being so diverse, that deck or that engine alone has great implications of what it can do in the format. You have an Omni-Negate, which a lot of decks lack right now, which is why they're falling victim to evenly matched. And also, when you go second, you have Dracoback, which you're able to target a card when your opponent's on the field and bounce it. So it's good in both ways, but also it summons 4k of damage, the Adventure Engine, quite quickly. So that's half your opponent's life points, whilst having an Omni-Gate as well and removal. So I'm not surprised why the Adventure Engine carried the Spright players in some way as well. When I say carry, it allows you just to win more games. Because if you think about Kashtira, if Kashtira gets stopped in some way, you need to be able to swing back control, or else next turn they're going to be able to swing it back. And you can't allow that to happen. But the Adventure Engine gives you that. It provides that for you. But also the cool thing with Spright is it gives you a non-targeting removal card. Spright Smashers. Double Cross is pretty good right now, especially in a wide format. And also the ability to be able to summon Red or Carrot, which can just control the game in either way, is solid. The deck also achieves a lot for very little. And start having a blue, that special summon to get the Jet, or the Jet to get the Star, to then get the blue, which then get your Carrot or your Red, is solid. I would probably play Pixies in Spright as well. So if you are playing pure Spright, play Pixies. This allows you to get over any big monster that's played right now. So definitely recommend that. Against Labyrinth, I'm sure Pixies would be pretty good as well. Gigantic Spright is nice as well. You got big attack of a monster. But then again, yeah, I do feel like Spright is probably a solid pick to take next week, just because of how wide the format is and how consistent that engine is. It's rarely going to brick. So it's going to achieve quite a lot in the tournament. And also it seemed to have quite a lot of success over the recent regionals in Europe. So I'm going to put Spright as tier 1 because I do feel like this deck is a solid pick to take next week just to give you a high win rate against what's provided in the current field. Next up, we have the different version, or the alternative version of Runic Sprite. Now, Runic as an engine on itself is solid. The fact that you can keep drawing cards whilst disrupting your opponent in many ways is strong. Now, you disrupt in multiple ways. You disrupt them by negating, by destroying. So you can clear a special summon monster. You can show you have Runic Destruction, which is spell and trap removal, which a lot of decks don't play spell and trap removal. You can able to have that as an implication in your deck, but also as an extender to summon a fusion monster. You get to draw cards, but also you get to banish cards from the top of your opponent's deck. Now that might not seem like a huge value, but it literally might make you win the game. So you're adding small additional rates of EV, expected value that is, into your game by picking Runic Engine or like Runic Sprite. The thing that I like about Runic Sprite is it's going to be good going first and going second. We do have Naturia Runic as well, which is quite popular. That's the next step we're going to discuss. I like that deck. I like what it tries to do, but the reason why I don't like it that much for next week is because it's not a very strong deck going second because of the Naturia package. You'd rather have the Spright package because you're able then to get smashes if you go second and double cross if you go first, or vice versa. If you depends which one you want. Depends what deck you're playing against as well. But also the fact that you just have more ways to win with the Spright package. And the thing is, the Naturia package as well, you're going to struggle when more players are playing Kaijus. And if you go first with Naturia Runic, if you make Naturia Beast and you have Fountain up and you have a ton of Runic spells, it's very hard to lose. But now that more players are playing Kaiju, having ending on Naturia Beast with Runic spells is weaker than it was before. So I do feel like Runic Naturia isn't as good as Runic Sprite. So I'm gonna put Runic Sprite as tier 1 again. It's just playing two of the strongest engines in the deck. Now, if there was a world where you could fit in the adventure engine, now we're talking. But I really don't think you could do that. But if you could play it, maybe we're onto something here. Maybe playing Runic Sprite Adventure might be the deck for next week because it's going to be very consistent. It has every card synergizes well with one another, and the implications that it has against all the decks in the format, it probably is a strong pick. So we could just add another one. Runic Adventure Sprite would be a solid pick as well. So we'll imagine that's in the tier 1 section. Next, like I mentioned, we have Naturia Runic. Naturia Runic is quite popular. I did go over this whilst explaining the Runic Sprite version. So with this, I would pull it in tier 1.5 just because of how weak it is compared to other Runic variants going second. The deck is nice. I like the fact that it has a nice extra deck in terms of synchros. And you do get value from discarding for Hugin as well. So I do like the Naturia engine with Runic, but I wouldn't pull it as tier 1. Okay, so next we have Mathmech. Mathmech did quite well in one of the UK Open Regional. I believe it made the finals. It lost in the finals to Kashtira. I believe two players made top 16 with the deck. The deck is quite interesting. It's quite hard to play around. If you look at, like, if this get played against a Spright deck, because that deck can, like a pure Spright version, because that deck can play arguably like the most hand traps out of any other deck in the format, this would be, that deck would counter this deck quite well. But Mathmech do play around quite a few hand traps, to be fair. I like what Mathmech tried to do, but it's kind of a deck that wants to go first. If it does go second, though, it can link up and it can make access code and destroy cards. And it has an easy way to OTK as well with Update Jammer, because Update Jammer is broken. So I would probably put Mathmech in terms of the YCS and in terms of what it's trying to achieve. And and because Kashtira is so popular, I don't think we could put it as tier 1 at all. And with Kashtira being so popular, and it probably will be the most represented deck, which means a Rise Heart will be everywhere, I am going to have to put Mathmech as tier 2. Next, we have Tearlaments. Now, Tearlaments got absolutely destroyed on the ban list. Everything pretty much got put to 1, apart from the field spell, which is one of the best field spells we've had in the game. The ability to increase your monsters, destroy a card in the field, and be able to search any Tearlament card is solid. I like the deck because it allows you to make strong fusion monsters against the current field. But then again, you do have to play King of the Swamp. You are favorable playing it in a slower format, which the format is much slower. But again, because Kashtira is everywhere as well, we can't pull it anywhere near tier 1 because it's not consistent enough. Tier 1.5, I don't think again we can put it in there just because of Kashtira being around, and it will just get run over by Spright as well because Spright has a faster engine now. So I'm going to put this as tier 2. In terms of how I've laid out the tier maker, we've got Broken, we've got tier 1, we've got tier 1.5, tier 2, and Wildcard. Now, Broken is absolutely broken, like the deck that you should just automatically mandatory play if we put a deck in there. I'm going to keep the 5 brackets the same moving forward with every tier list, so it's consistent. But also, if you do ever see something in Broken, then it should be an automatic include in your deck list or the deck that you pick. So next we have Exosister. Now, Exosister does favor in a format that's much slower because it plays a very good trap or some very good traps. Martha is nice as well, but Martha also loses value when more players are now playing Ash Blossom in the format. The deck is good. The fact that it was able to lock out, or it can lock out graveyard effects, obviously it was horrible to play against that when you're playing Tearlaments. But because there isn't many decks right now abusing the graveyard, this deck loses value. I don't think I would take it to the YCS at all. It is a nice deck, but if you're going to play a deck like this, and in terms of what it tries to achieve at that pace, I would just automatically play Kashtira. So I'm going to put this as tier 2. Next, we've got Marincess. This deck had some recent success at the UK Open. It topped. It went X11, which is actually surprising for what the deck can do. Deck is all right. I kind of like the archetype, but I'm not a huge fan. It did top a YCS in South America. The guy did pretty well in Swiss as well. I believe he came like 5th or 6th. So he did pretty solid. In terms of the YCS, I don't think it's a good choice to take. There's factors into this as well you've got to consider, and there's factors that you're probably not thinking about. I mean, let me explain. So time is a crucial thing within Yu-Gi-Oh! Time is a thing where it does affect how you perform overall, because what time can do is it will put the game to an end if you both take too long, and when the game puts to an end, the game is decided on who has the higher life points, and usually it could just result in a draw, which can effectively be a loss. In the YCS, we're going to have a lot of players, especially for the 250th. For Europe, there should be 3,000. There's 3,600 spots for Europe. So let's say 3,500 players turn up. It's going to be top 64. It's going to be 12 rounds. You need to go 10-2 to top. 10, maybe some 10-2s just miss out. Okay, but also, so you have to go 10-2, which means going 10-2 and 10 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss is effectively the same. Okay, so you don't want to go you don't want to draw at all at the event, at this YCS especially. So if you're playing a deck which players don't really know, it's not been seen much by many players, they're going to be reading your cards. And let's look at Ninja, for example. Jesse Cotton played Ninja at the YCS Las Vegas. Okay, I bet he went to time many times during that tournament because I bet everyone was reading his cards. Why hinder yourself at an event when people have to read what you're trying to achieve? Okay, so with that, in fact, we can't even consider this deck. So this goes tier 2. So don't play a deck where players have to read all your cards unless the deck is just insanely broken. But they should know what it does then if it is broken, because they should be building their deck to prepare for it. Next, we have Floowandereeze. Floowandereeze seen some recent success in regionals. It's been topping and winning. The deck is very consistent still. It did lose the wind statue. The wind statue was a big problem for a lot of decks, and if the wind statue was still legal, this deck would automatically be tier 1. Arguably could be even in the broken category in some ways as well, just because of how restrictive it is. It probably would be an interesting match against Labyrinth. In terms of Floowandereeze, I actually think it's a solid deck in terms of consistency. I don't think it would be a deck that is anywhere near the level of Spright or Labyrinth or Kashtira. I wouldn't play this over any of those decks. I do think it will be better than Marincess, Exosister, Tearlaments, and Mathmech. I do think as well it's probably on the same level as Branded in some ways. Again, I'm not biased against Branded, but I just don't think it's a solid pick for the YCS. I'm going to put this as tier 1.5 and not as tier 2. Next, we have Dark World. Dark World is quite surprising. I actually think this is a good deck in some ways. The way it can hand loop, the way it can just summon a bunch of monsters. I like it. I'd probably say in some ways you could put it as the wild card, but you got to think as well with Kashtira running around everywhere, it's going to be a problem. I wouldn't sleep on Dark World though, but I just don't think it's the deck to take for the YCS. I wouldn't even put it in the 1.5 because the 1.5 I want to be quite strict on what could actually get you to top cut in some ways. Dark World, we might see a few in top cut across the 3 250ths, but overall I wouldn't take it, even though I do actually like what the deck does. So I'm going to put this as tier 2. Next we have Salamangreat. Salamangreat got top 4 at the most recent YCS in South America. Surprisingly, it did well. Well, the thing is, it's consistent. That's the implication here. That's the thing that allows this deck to perform so well, is the consistency, but also the control route. It can be quite aggressive as well with Update Jammer, and its ability as well just to be able to abuse access code and link up. And you're, in terms of exchange as well, you're not really losing many resources with the engine. I like the deck a lot. This is what got me 5th place at the World Championships. Salad did. I went undefeated in Swiss. And the deck was very consistent, and that's a true thing here we got to think about, because the YCS is 12 rounds and you have to go 10-2. You need a super consistent deck. This is a reason why we can't even put Kashtira in the broken section, because the deck can lose to itself due to not a way to be able to play, and if the fact that it can be responded to, and if you don't have multiple ways to extend, you're restricted. So that's why Kashtira could never be in broken, unless they have a way to fix it where you can, are able, if all the cards were right in a way where you could just literally special summon them from your hand whilst you do control a monster. That's one of the things the deck is just, that's why it doesn't achieve so much. And that's why Birth is probably one of the best Kashtira cards, if not the best. So going back to Salamangreat, I do think this is a good card to play. The deck to play, because you can play a counter trap, which a lot of decks don't play any negations, and also you can play like an Icarus attack, a destruction effect trap, and the fact that you can just literally add those continuously. I do think this is a good deck. I actually do think this is a good deck to take to the YCS, and I do think we'll have a few players topping with it. I wouldn't put it in the tier 1 section, but I'm definitely putting it in the 1.5. Next we have Sword Soul. I like Sword Soul. I like what it tries to do. With Runic getting quite popular, Blackout gains more value because it lets you summon a token. And the thing with the deck is as well, it can set up a nice board. The reason why the deck probably hasn't seen much success prior, because of everyone playing Sphere Mode and Lava Golem more frequently. Now that the fact that everyone's starting to play Kaijus and cutting the Lava Golems and Sphere Modes, this deck probably has a better shot in the tournaments, because think about it. Their end board is going to be Chijiao and Baron with Blackout set most likely, right? So if you Kaiju, which you can Kaiju, are you going to Kaiju the worm so they can't then Blackout you and negate something? Or are you going to get rid of the Baron, which can negate and destroy something? It really depends. And so I do think Sword Soul is actually a good deck as well. It's very consistent, something that that you need for the YCS, and I'm going to keep emphasizing on that. You need a super consistent deck next week because the format is so diverse. You need your engine to be able to play. So Sword Soul, I'm going to put in the tier 1.5. I actually do think it will do quite well. Traptrix saw quite a lot of success due to Pack. Pack made a great series on playing on a budget. I recommend checking his video out. I'll probably just link his video down below in the description. So Pack made Traptrix very popular because of his success at locals, and he was telling a lot of players that if all you need is $30 to do well at locals, and in some ways you're right. The structure deck is very good, one of the best structure decks we've had because we've got evenly matched in there, Ash Blossom in there, we've got Regeki, Feather Duster, etc. And we've even got Kaiju's in there, right? So 3 of those decks, yeah, is $30 or £30, etc. The deck is good for locals. For YCS, I don't think so. I wouldn't take it to a YCS. It's not strong enough to win. So then we've got to ask ourselves, is it strong enough to top? It can be, but it'll be a struggle. If you are going to win to play a trap deck, you're better taking the Labyrinth version deck over Traptrix because you can play a great range of traps, but also the fact that Labyrinth doesn't lose to as much as like Traptrix would. And because everyone is starting to play evenly matched now in some way, even players are maining it, you lose a lot more value playing Traptrix over Labyrinth. I am going to put Traptrix though. It's close. It is between 1.5 and 2. I really want to put it at 1.5. I really do. But in terms of like the options you've got at hand, would I want to play like Salad over I'm going to have to put it as 1.5. In some ways it can be as 2, but yeah, I mean maybe I'm wrong on that on Traptrix. But it's between the 2. And finally we have Ancient Fairy Dragon. Now, when I'm coming to this card, what I mean is combo variants. I do think there's going to be a combo deck which abuses this with Jashudo, with the field spells, even with a small Kashtira engine and the adventure package in some ways. There's going to be something there. There's a combo deck there for sure. I kind of wanted to put Punk in the video as well and put it in the wildcard section. But then again, because Kashtira is so popular, I don't think we can do that. Ancient Fairy Dragon and like combo decks, I'm going to put it in the wildcard section. Guys, let me know what you think. Would you agree on what I've suggested? Would you change anything? Or is there something that I've missed? Let me know in the comments below. I'll respond to you. And if you like this sort of video, like it. Subscribe, it's completely free. If you want to see more of these type of videos in the future, let me know. And let me know what sort of tier maker list you want me to make next. Guys, look after yourselves. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.